Good morning, everyone. Theo said tonight's lecture, which confused me somewhat.
I'm very sorry that I'm reading from my notes. This morning's lecture.
Because I saw you at home, so I knew you weren't abroad. You never know with Zoom, do you? Anyway, good morning, everyone, and it gives me great pleasure to be introducing Professor Gavin Flood, who, I mean, he's definitely merits the cliche of he really doesn't need an introduction. I'm sure everyone joining in knows exactly who Gavin is, but I will give a brief resume. Perhaps best known to lots of people, well, other than through his books, which I'll come on to, but as for his work in Oxford. He's from 2005, I think, been in the Faculty of Theology at University of Oxford, and has also been the academic director of the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. He's Professor of Hindu Studies and Comparative Religion at Oxford, and currently, I think, probably got that role, but also Senior Research Fellow at Campion Hall. He's published extensively over a long and highly productive career. I will just name a few books, which I'm sure most people know: An Introduction to Hinduism and the Blackwell Companion to Hinduism. So not afraid of taking on the big subjects, and then a couple of books that are more directly relevant to us as scholars and students of yoga: The Ascetic Self and the Tantric Body, which again I'm sure are well known to lots of you. He's worked extensively on Shaivism over the years, and that is the topic under discussion today, which Professor Flood's going to be talking to us about today. Well, connected to it anyway, in the Netra-tantra and its yogas. So thank you once again, Gavin, and over to you.
Thank you, Jim, for a very generous introduction. And thank you both, Theo and Jim, for inviting me to give this lecture. And thank you all for coming along on a Tuesday morning. So, I'll share my screen and then I can show you some pictures. We're having to get used to this new way of working. Can you see that, everybody?
Works great.
Put you up at the top of the picture. There we are. So anyway, today I'm going to speak about the Netra-tantra and its yogas. And I've been working on this for, well, I got interested in this donkeys years ago when I was, actually was an undergraduate at Lancaster University. And then there was Helen Brunner wrote an article, a summary of the text, Tantra du Nord, and that sparked my interest. And I think that's a wonderful article. And then since then, in 2006, sitting in on one of Alexis Sanderson's classes, Somdev Vasudev was there, and we were chatting in a coffee shop afterwards. He says, "Why don't you do something on the Netra-tantra, on the chapter on the subtle yoga?" So I got interested in that. So I got these manuscripts from Nepal, and I did that first chapter, and then it got bigger. And so when I'm now with two colleagues, Bjarne Vernicke Olsen and Rajan Katiwada, we're trying to do an edition of the text based on the Nepalese witnesses. So what I'll be talking about is based on the Nepalese text. It's almost the same as the Kashmiri one, but there are interesting differences, as we'll see. So that's the background, and here we go with the yogas of the Netra-tantra. If I can get this to work. Here we are. So Alexis Sanderson over the years has mapped these traditions. Now this is an emic. I mean, although I've got this from Alexis's mapping, he's representing an indigenous understanding of the traditions and their classification. So around the time of Abhinavagupta, say. So on the one hand, you've got the Vedic, the Vedika tradition, Orthodox Brahmanism, focused on texts like the Manu Smriti, the laws of Manu, about rules of purity, what the Brahmins should and shouldn't do, who they can and can't hang out with, what they can and can't eat, and that kind of thing. And then you've got what Alexis has identified as the Atimarga, the higher path or the outer path, which regards itself as transcending the Vedic tradition. And this has three layers that Alexis has identified, Atimarga 1, 2, and 3, which are identified with these different groups, the Parshupatas, the Lakulichas, and the Karpalikas, who probably everyone's heard of. Now, I won't go into the details of all this, only so far as it's relevant to the text that we're looking at. These were ascetic groups, and they were highly successful in medieval India. And there's a great book by Rumila Thapar called Somnath, and that's about a Shaiva monastic institution and temple in Gujarat, which was run by the Parshupatas. So they were a highly successful and wealthy monastic institution. On the other hand, you've got these, what we might call the tantric traditions, the mantra marga. The mantra marga, the path of mantras, that's really tantric Shaivism. So that's technically by tantra, we mean the mantra marga. And this comprises two subdivisions, the Shaiva Siddhanta, which is the core tantric tradition, the backbone of the tradition, if you like, which was metaphysically dualistic, which says that the soul, God, and world are three eternally distinct realities, and which provides the ritual basis, the ritual substrate for the tantric traditions, the daily ritual at daily rites at dawn, dusk, and midday. And then in reaction to that, you've got these, what we might call the non-Siddhanta, non-Siddhantika traditions. They used to be called Kashmiri Shaivism, but as Alexis points out, that's a bit of a misnomer because these traditions weren't restricted to Kashmir. And in there, you've got sects, different cults or sects, the Trika, the Kula, and the Krama. Now, the Netra-tantra is between these, if you like. It's not a transgressive text, but nor is it a strictly Shaiva Siddhanta text, because it's not dualistic in the sense that the goal it claims is becoming one with Shiva. So it's not becoming Shiva Tulya like Shiva, but it's becoming one with Shiva. It's not transgressive, as we'll see. And the other path that Alexis has identified, the Kula Marga, the path of the family of goddesses, and that leads into the Sri Vidya. Now, there is influence of the Shakta traditions on the Netra-tantra, as we'll see. And some people think, including Divakar Acharya here, thinks that it could be classified as a Shakta text, and my colleague Bjarne Veronica Olsen. I'm not sure about that myself, but anyway, we'll see. So the text in it states, it's dated by Alexis to be around 700 to 850 CE, and he bases this on internal evidence of iconography within the text. So a three-headed Vaikuntha and various other iconographic details which could only have occurred during this period. Now, in Nepal, the Netra-tantra occurs in Nepal in a different recension to the Kashmiri edition, and the older version is recorded in Nepal. So it's difficult to say. It was probably composed in Kashmir and went to Nepal, but it's possible that it was composed in Nepal and went to Kashmir. But certainly the Kashmir version, the Nepalese version seems to be the older version, because when it got to Kashmir, it was the text was cleaned up, was made more Paninian, was made more legitimate in terms of Sanskrit. And it's interesting that I did think that Kshemarāja may have been the one that cleaned up the text, but I don't think so anymore, because we were reading it, and in his commentary, he seems to have two readings for some verses before him, and one of which is the Nepalese version, and one of which is the Kashmiri version. So I think that Kshemarāja had access to both versions of the text. So it's called the Amriteshvara Tantra, that's Amriteshvara Tantra, of course, but in our text, in the Nepalese version, it calls it the Amriteshvara Tantra, wrongly. And Vishveshvara was the author, not the author of the text, but he was the one who was responsible for its copying in Kashmir. He was a minister in the king's court. He was also the author of an initiatory text, the Amriteshvara Diksha Vidhi, a Nepalese text on initiation and ritual for the royal family, and specifically for the initiation of kings. And Alexis Sanderson has written a very important and interesting article on the Netra-tantra and its role in its royal role, as it were. That's called Religion and the State, Shaiva Officiants in the Territory of the King's Brahmanical Chaplain. That's readily available online. Now, our text was copied at the bequest of Vishveshvara, probably for King Arimala, who reigned 1200 to about 1216, and or his son Abhayamala from about 1216 to 1255. He ruled. Now, perhaps it was because the king was sick. Perhaps it was the king's son, Abhayamala, who was sick, and it was copied for him. In which case, it succeeded because he died in 1255 from an earthquake in Kathmandu, Abhayamala. So he lasted a long time. Now, the Kirtidara is the scribe of the witness that we've been working with. And he writes at the conclusion of this work, this injunction by the Lord of Immortality, Mrityunjit, is completed, full and auspicious. This book, commissioned by Vishveshvara, was written by me, the scholar Kirtidara, on Saturday in the bright fortnight of the month March or April 320, which translates into 1200. I Googled it the other day and it gave me two possible dates, the 25th of March or the 1st of April 1200. So that's when he finished his work. And that's a copy of the text. That's the last folio of the Netra-tantra, copied in 1200 by Kirtidara. It's been eaten at the side, but the rest of it's quite good. Now, the goals of yoga in this text are the goddess asks, the structures that the goddess asks Shiva, what is the method by which all the suffering of beings in the three worlds are liberated? She asks that in chapter 2. And Shiva answers that it's due to the I, the nature, the I mantra, that beings are freed, and the threefold method, Now, what is this threefold method? That's what I want to speak about mostly today, but I'll just talk about other things as well. So the I mantra, it says, is the best, as the eye is the best of the senses. It illuminates all that exists. It's the very soul of all mantras, it says. So think of Lord of the Rings. It's the great eye, shining eye. Now, I think I'm going to let the text speak for itself. So I'm going to give you a load of quotes. You've got the Sanskrit in the handout, most of it anyway. So the kings, princes, and queens are repeatedly afflicted by sudden death and killed by the snares of time, along with all living beings, beginning with Brahmins, afflicted by all kinds of faults and fears. If they're singled out by the Bhutas, Yakshas, Grahas, Unmadas, Shakinis, Yoginis, Ganas, Bhaganis, Rudramachis, etc., Davids, Dharmanikas, by Rupikas, Apasmaras, Pishachas, and also others, Brahmarakshas and millions of Ugrahas. And they are free by simply bringing to mind what I am about to tell you. So it regards itself as very important because all these supernatural agents that oppress people are kept at bay. They free human beings from those forces. Now, I put Davyas in, I don't know what that means, Davyas. I put that in brackets because it also occurs, there's another text called the Ishana Shiva Guru Deva Padati, the ritual manual of Ishana Shiva Guru Deva, which was composed in Kerala. Now, it has almost the same list of supernatural beings that possess you. And there it calls these Davis Davyas. I suppose that's plural, Davis, I don't know. Anyway, so I thought it was interesting, this list. So the text goes on, today I will tell you about the threefold method, which is definitely the best. It bestows the best supernatural ability, siddhi, and liberation, moksha, to be attained by mantra, yoga, and knowledge. So those are the three methods. I speak about that which is made of mantra, which possesses a threefold perfection, complete, associated with its own seal, mudra, the supreme, that which protects all. Some of this, I don't know what it means, but we'll talk about that. So the goals of yoga in the text are protection from these supernatural beings, siddhi, magical powers, moksha, liberation, immortality, and identity with Shiva. So whether these are all compatible with each other is an open question. Does it indicate that two things, that the text is very, very composite and it's lots of different things coming in, or it could indicate that the text is trying to be true to its universalist agenda. It's and incorporating a lot of different things, different goals into itself. So you've got levels of practice here. The term dhyana is used in the text to mean visualization, as it is in most tantric texts. It means visualization, meditation as visualization. But it also, I think, it refers to not so much to visualization, which is perhaps more of a Buddhist practice, but to the recitation of the visualization text. So I think it probably means that. Not only visualization, but perhaps recitation as well. And then it speaks about these three levels of practice: gross, subtle, and supreme. And this is a way of ordering. I think this is a way that the text uses to order a variety of practices that it's aware of at the time of its writing, that it's trying to incorporate into this universal system. And it's concerned with the sadhaka, the practitioner. And it assumes the Shaivism structure of initiation, and where you become the two initiations, the Samaya Diksha, where you become initiated into the tradition, and the Nirvana Diksha, which guarantees liberation. And these practices are for the yogi and for the king, or somebody doing it the yogi doing it on behalf of the king. And it's concerned with initiation and consecration. So chapters 4 and 5 and daily rites, chapter 3, are concerned with that. Now they're quite thin chapters, so it's probable that the text is just assuming that the reader knows those practices from other texts. So you've got a hierarchy, an implied hierarchy of texts, in which it assumes that lower revelation, if you like. So it's concerned with protection through mantra, chapters 1 and 6 particularly, construction of mantras, chapters 2, 22, 23, and salvation through the different deity systems, chapters 9 to 13. And it's concerned in chapters 6, 7, and 8 with the three yogas that I want to talk about. The gross meditation, chapter 6, the subtle meditation, the sukshma dhyanam, which identifies with yoga, chapter 7, and the supreme meditation, paradhyanam, chapter 8. Now here, dhyana is used not as visualization, but as something, as a practice, I think. But that's what the text calls them. And also in the chapter 7, which I want to talk about, it talks about the Tantra Prakriya, the normative tantric system, as found in the Trika, for example, and the Kula Prakriya, the transgressive Kaula system. Now, the Kula Prakriya is transgressive, whereas the Tantra Prakriya isn't. But there's no transgression in this text, but it does distinguish between these two forms of practice with regard to the subtle body, as we'll see in a minute. Now, the text itself doesn't mention these words, but Kshemaraja does in his commentary. And it seems to map perfectly onto the chapter 7, this distinction. So one suspects that the text itself is aware of this distinction. And the Kula Prakriya is concerned with the flooding of the body with nectar, the nectar of immortality. And this is the Amrita Plavanam, And I'm wondering, and Bjarne as well, but we were wondering whether this idea of the flooding of the body with the nectar enters mainstream Hatha practices. Jim will know all about this, and replaces, according to Bjarne Kavernika Olsen, replaces what he calls a bindu dharana, the holding semen in the head. So he thinks you've got two different models operating in this text, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And later traditions retain both models. So Kshemaraja uses this word, Amrita Plavana, in his commentary. Now, chapter 7 is about the visualization of the subtle body, and it's an early representation of the chakra system that everyone knows. I think it may be the earliest occurrence of the word chakra used in this sense. I was talking to someone in Nepal, actually. They said, no, chakra in this sense occurs in Patanjali, but I don't think it does. I haven't actually had time to check it out, but I'm very skeptical that it would occur there, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, chapter 7. I'm just going to translate the text is translated. I'm just going to read it and let it speak for itself. So the Lord spoke. Now I will tell you about the excellent, supreme, subtle visualizing meditation, which comprises the sequence of 6, the 16 supports, the 3 objects, and the 5 voids, the 12 knots, the 3 powers, the path of the 3 abodes, and the 3 channels. Having realized the body, O one with beautiful hips, as a body that follows the path of 10 channels and 35 million channels via the 72,000 channels, and as a body overrun by a host of channels riddled with diseases in the fire, the yogi then fills himself or another with the nectar of the subtle visualizing meditation, proclaimed as the highest. He becomes a divine body bereft of all disease. So that's an interesting passage. It's complex, all these systems overlaid on each other, 3 of this, 12 of that, and all the rest of it. But the basic idea is that you've got a hierarchy in the body, a vertical axis in the body, and these different things are all mapped onto that vertical axis. And the body is pervaded by these channels, by these nadis. But they're not only good things, they're also riddled with disease. They're full of impurity, and you have to purify them in this practice. And you do it for another, for the king as well. Presumably the yogi fills himself or another, it says, as well. And if you've got the Sanskrit in front of you, you can read it in there, in the handout that I've given. So, okay, I'll be returning to some of that in a minute. But then, having become the mantra Aham, it says, established there, that's in the base center, the base, the lowest Ardhara, moving in a stable manner in its own circle, the yogi should establish his self-perception, and let's use the word abhimana. That's interesting, abhimana. It's often translated as pride, but I think it means a sense of self, your sense of who you are, as it were, in the place of birth, by producing vibrations by his own self-arising vibration, an elegant one, by distinguishing levels of being. Now, this is interesting, that there's a term bhava bheda, which occurs throughout the text. We've had long discussions about what it means, but here I've rendered it distinguishing levels of being. The yogi should join it, his self-perception, to the root base from that place. By applying the needle of sound, he should pierce those levels through the application of the subtle visualizing meditation. Having pierced the 16 centers and the 12 knots, the one who has mounted the path of the central channel should penetrate steadily towards the highest. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this idea of the vertical axis of the body, and this power moves up through the central axis like a needle of sound, it says, piercing these levels. So it's kind of sound moving up through the central channel. And the yogi who has entered that highest condition becomes equal to Shiva, the all-pervading, due to the power which has been stirred up, who drives away all diseases completely, or which drives away all diseases completely. And having filled the interior of the heart again by that path, he causes the penetrated elementary matter of the channel of the elixir, bit of a mouthful, obtained by meditation, to rest there. Having obtained this experience, he should cause that elixir to flow quickly from that place and leave it remaining everywhere. So he's pierced the top of the head, and then the nectar that's contained in the top of the head flows to the heart, and from the heart floods the body. So you've got this nectar of immortality which floods the body. So this is what Bjarne calls a Shakta model, if you like, of the flooding of the body, as opposed to the other model where you retain this power at the crown of the head, in the head, or at the top of the head. So it then says, one's own body entirely filled with the supreme infinite nectar and with the joy of non-death and non-old age becomes completely filled with the subtle sound, both internally and externally, O beloved, due to the conqueror of death mantra, and by the yoga of the visualizing meditation. Then that divine body is attained quickly and truly in no other way, O goddess. So that's the chapter 7. Well, that's the Shakta method. It also talks about the other one where you just leave the power at the crown of the head. I won't talk. Yeah, I'll if I talk for about another 20 minutes, then that will give us plenty of time for questions and discussion. So having attained, the chapter concludes, having attained the condition without suffering, the yogi should discover through his own experience, Baba, that his own true nature is Shiva, whose nature is will, cognition, and action, Icha, Jnana, and Kriya. Having attained the subtle state of the Lord of immortality, the yogi becomes immortal. Then, having become immortal, he will become the conqueror of death without doubt. Now, so you've got these 16 supports, which are the supporting vowels, probably. You've got these 3 focal points or objects, the sun, moon, and fire, according to Ksema Raja. You've got the 5 voids, which I think are also known in Tantric Buddhism. And you've got 3 powers, Icha, Jnana, and Kriya Shaktis, will, cognition, or knowledge, and action powers. And you've got 3 luminaries, the sun, moon, and fire. Again, possibly, I'm not 100% clear what they are, but I think that's what they are. And the 3 channels, the Sushumna, the Ida, and the Pingala, which we get in later Hatha Yoga texts. So the sun, moon, and fire, quite interesting, that occurs in later traditions as inner visions. So the yogi goes beyond them in this inner journey, which is also a journey through the cosmos. So this idea in the text that the cosmos, the structure, the hierarchical structure of the universe is recapitulated in the body. So the yogi goes up on this journey through the body, which is a journey through the cosmos. And there are recent parallels to this idea. I was reading something in the Radha Swami, 19th century Shiv Dayal Singh talks about the moon being the Sahasra, what he calls the 1,000-petaled lotus. The sun is what he calls Trikuti, which is beyond that, and Mahashun beyond that, the great emptiness beyond that, is moon, sun, and fire. So I was wondering if there's an echo in that tradition of this earlier kind of system of these inner visions. But I'm hesitant about reading back modern ideas back into the ancient text, but sometimes it can be useful, and they do offer possible interpretations, which is why contemporary anthropology fieldwork can indeed inform our understanding of the meaning of texts and vice versa. Now, this is interesting that we in chapters in the chapter 7 verse 13, it uses the Kashmir version uses the term virechayet, one should emit, or is it the other way around? Sorry, it's the other way around. Virodayet, one should hold the power at the crown of the head, and the Nepalese rendering uses virechayet, one should emit. So I'm wondering if, I thought this was interesting, this distinction. It could mean that they both really talking about this, meaning the same thing, but it did provoke thought that perhaps the use of these different verbs referred to different models, the flooding of the body or the retaining of the power in the head. Does this reflect a Shakta anthropology, as Veronica Olson argues? So the Amrita Plavanam is the flooding of the body with nectar. Yeah, as Sir Veronica Olson argues, that it enters the mainstream Hatha Yoga. I don't know the details. Or the other things I was interested in was shoshana and burning. So you've got plavana, flooding, drying, and burning. And these are practices of visualization in which the impure body is imagined as being dried up and then burned to ashes, followed by being flooded with nectar arising from the union of Shiva and Shakti at the crown of the head. So I think this is referred to. So there's another text, the Netra-tantra, which is later. I don't know the dates of it, I'm afraid, but it's probably much later than the Netra-tantra. And you've got that practice here too. So repeating the saving syllable Om 12 times, the yogin should retain the breath in the middle channel. Then you should dry out the body with the wind seed syllable, uttered for the drying up of the body. And again, as before, having exhaled the inhaled breath, he should retain it. Then he should burn the body with the burning seed syllable, called the burning of the body. And again, as before, having exhaled and having exhaled and inhaled, he should retain the breath. He should meditate on the flooding and should flood the body from head to toe, O goddess, with the nectar held in the head, following the union of Shiva and Kundalini. So it's possibly much later. I don't know the date of that, but it's much later, I think. But anyway, it's interesting. There's the Sanskrit for you there. We can refer back to that if you want to. So you've got three closely related practices here. You've got Plavana, attested in the Netra-tantra, the Hatha Yogic Plavana performed in conjunction with Shoshana and Dahana, drying and burning, flooding, and or the other way around, burning. No, I can't remember the sequence. And the pan-tantric ritual practice of the Bhuta Shuddhi, the ritual burning of the body, which is performed in the Shaiva Siddhanta every day. You've symbolically burned the body in your imagination, and then you recreate the body as divine with nyasa. You've got Bhuta Shuddhi nyasa, recreation of the divine body, internal worship where you visualize the deity, and external worship where you perform puja to an external icon. Now, this point of note, this is possibly the earliest occurrence of the chakra in the sense of bodily center. And interestingly, Bjarne Veronica Olson's two models of a person implied in this text, in the yogic and the Shakta image of the holding the nectar or flooding the body with nectar. I wouldn't like to make too much of that, but it's interesting. So, oh yeah, there's 18th century famous, these are, I just thought I'd show you the pictures, the Chakra Man from the Wellcome Institute manuscript, probably about 18th century, and there's two of them, there's another one there. 18th century chakra. So anyway, I think these are possible. This might be the earliest occurrence of this, the word chakra used in this sense. This is a very curious picture. There's a figure, he looks like he's falling off of the ladder or something, that figure on the right. I don't know what he's doing, the black figure. Seems to be falling off the ladder. I don't know. Anyway. Now, so that's the subtle meditation. The next chapter is on the supreme meditation. I'm just going to describe these practices. So what do we mean by supreme? We mean closer to transcendence, more immediate access to the supreme. The yogi becomes Shiva. And the yogi shines forth as Shiva, who is the omnipresent, all-seeing and all-doing. And I will speak about that condition which, beyond which there is nothing else, he says. And Shiva says, having attained that state, the yogi becomes ageless and deathless through identification with it. It is the eternal which speech cannot express. This is an interesting passage. That cannot be seen by the eye, that cannot be heard by the ear, that the nose cannot smell, that the tongue cannot taste, that the sense of touch cannot feel, that cannot be thought by the mind, free from all colour and taste, yet it is endowed with all colour and taste, immeasurable and beyond the senses. So it's apophatic kind of theology here. And when it is attained, the text goes on, O goddess, the yogis become free from old age and death through their exalted practice and supreme detachment. Due to the abandoning of passion and hate, due to the destruction of greed and delusion, O beloved, due to the abandoning of intoxication and jealousy, and due to the destruction of self-conceit and arrogance, the yogi certainly attains the eternal, imperishable, supreme Shiva. If he attains that merely in the blink of an eye, then henceforth he is liberated and not born again. He may attain this realization by means of the eight-limbed yoga and not otherwise. Aha, so here we've got Ashtanga yoga, eight-limbed yoga. Is that right? Well, it is and it isn't right. It reinterprets the eight-limbed yoga in a new way. So it says self-control is said to be the end of the world of becoming, eternal and supreme. Restraint is constant meditation on the supreme reality. Having settled into the middle breath between the paths of exhalation and inhalation, supported by the power of knowledge, posture is abiding in that. So it's a rereading, it's a new interpretation of the eight limbs of yoga. Having abandoned the gross condition of the breath and so on, he should similarly abandon the subtle inner path. After that, the yogi will attain the supreme vibration beyond the subtle. And this is called breath control, from which the mind does not move. So it's in keeping with the text's hierarchical understanding that the supreme yoga is through the reinterpretation of the Ashtanga is going beyond the subtle level, and it's realizing the truth of the absolute reality, as it were. So then it talks about the fluctuations of the qualities beginning with sound are experienced by the mind, abandoning which the yogi may enter the supreme place by his own mind. This is called withdrawal, cutting the noose of becoming. So the fluctuations of the mind, we all know that from standard yoga, they're abandoned by entering the supreme place by the power of your own mind, and that's called withdrawal. And having gone beyond the intellect, the qualities and the mind, meditating on the unchanging Lord, who without qualities, who is the direct object of meditation and reflexive awareness, the wise know this to be meditation, dhyana. So it's a reinterpretation of dhyana. It's not visualization, it's realization, it's focusing on this, this eternal object, which is also the subject. The Supreme Self is held by the supporting concentration at all times. That supporting concentration is defined here as the destruction of the bond of becoming. And the placing of consciousness equally in all beings is called absorption, samadhi. And this is the real meaning, otherwise people are befuddled. So there we are. So having discerned the absolute state in the mass of consciousness and unconscious matter, the wise know that absorption to be the eternal nature. So you realize this self is free and absolute. Having firmly perceived the supreme state, time is cheated, and he becomes the supreme Lord, the deathless Lord, O goddess. He becomes a conqueror of death, and time does not bind him. So there's the Sanskrit if you want to refer back to it. So that's the supreme condition. And now I'll go back to the chapter 6, which is one of perhaps the more interesting ones, because it's about mantric and ritual cure. So we've got the very highest, we've got the subtle, now we've got the gross, the stula yoga. And this is concerned with protection from these supernatural beings that it's already listed in chapter 2, these families of supernatural beings who are governed by a chief deity. So the Vinayakas are governed by Vignesha, and the mothers by the different goddesses, the 7 mothers. And through making balis, through making offerings, blood offerings to these, ablutions, fumigation, mantra, and pious works, the mantrin should make offerings in remote places and at the junctions of the day. And the NT records a number of these practices in this chapter, in chapter 19 and in chapter 6. So in chapter 19, it says that the practitioner should make offerings on the bank of a river or in a cremation ground, in a forest, in the ritual diagram of the mothers, and in the early morning or at midday, and at midnight. He should offer plenty of water mixed with rice to them. The offering is to be presented to them and they become satisfied by it. For whatever the boundless mothers situated there or near, I'm not sure what that is, Tantra style, desire to destroy someone, then you should worship the eternal great mothers, the seven mothers, Brahmi, Maheshwari, Kamari, Vaishnavi, Varahi, Indrani, and Chamunda. So these are famous. This is a 12th century image. I think this is from Orissa, but I'm not 100% sure. You've got Virabhadra and the seven mothers and Ganesha at the end. So there were a fairly standard list of these goddesses. Now in chapter 6, these goddesses, they govern hordes of other lesser deities who cause trouble to people. And if someone's possessed or if they're sick, then chapter 6 is about how to cure them with mantra. So you write the name of the person to be protected. Having written the name of the person, one should worship Lord Mrityunjit, the Shiva, the conqueror of death, and he swiftly snatches the person from death. Truly, I do not lie, says the text. One should offer oblation with white sugar, accompanied by sesamum soaked in clarified butter and milk, in a fire with kindling of pure wood, in a round fire pit surrounded by 3 girdles. And by this method of great protection, one should make the offering for the person designated by his name. And the great power will quickly appear to one who has gone to the mantra for support. In another formula, he may even offer only milk and sugar. And the conqueror of death mantra may quickly conquer death because of the fire oblation. And about this, there's no doubt. So I don't think I've got time to read them all. Anyway, here's interesting. The emaciated body will be nourished, O one observing the vow, from the fire oblation by being smeared with 3 kinds of caraway plant oil, I think, and with balls of fragrant resin. When a weak man filled with 100 of diseases is cared for, then after repeating his name framed by the nature mantra, he will be freed, even though by itself ineffective. Whatever mantra the wise man repeats, framed by the Lord of Immortality mantra, then that will quickly achieve success. So the power of the mantra Om Jum Sa is such that you frame someone's name with it, and frame any old mantra, which is any old useless mantra, which is any mantra which has become useless, you frame it with Om Jum Sa, and then it reinvigorates it, and it reinvigorates the person too. So the framing mantra is a remedy for a feeble body, O goddess. The recipient will obtain nourishment in an instant and fill out again. And having made the soul of the sick person held by the letters beginning with Sa, I think it means Om Jum Sa is the short version of the nature mantra, but I think it means it in reverse. Sa Jum Om. So I think you frame the person with positively Om Jum Sa Deva Dataya or something, Sa Jum Om. And then he'll be free from all disease. Of this, there's no doubt. So these beings, it classifies those desiring to harm and kill, the Hantu karmas, those desiring sex, the Rati karmas, those desiring more sex, the Bhoktu karmas, and those desiring meat offerings, the Bali karmas. So you want to protect yourself from these supernatural beings through this method that is I've just described. Now in chapter 20 or chapter 21 of the Nepalese version, it's interesting because it offers a new vision. There's a deeper theology of possession which occurs in this text, and the deeper reason why Shiva allows these supernatural forces to afflict people. It's so that they can be liberated. So the goddess asks Shiva, all these yoginis and bhutas and so on, they're all your servants. Why do you allow them to oppress people, she says? And he says, I'll let you into a secret. It's the yoginis kill people as a sacrifice to me, and through sacrifice to Shiva, they're liberated. So this is a kind of theologization, if you like, in the text of popular practices. And the Shiva says in chapter 21, 4-10, listen, O goddess, I will tell you the secret, supreme wonder, from the teachings of the Lord of the Lord for bound souls, since the malevolent beings desire to hurt living creatures. Those yoginis are really bereft of greed and delusion, free from passion and hate. They will offer humans to the God of gods for the purpose of sacrifice. Well, there's a theological innovation for you in the history of Indian religions. These yoginis kill you, but they're doing you a favor. They're because you become a sacrifice to Shiva and thereby freed. They do not harm, for they are without greed, without desire to harm. They protect the teachings of God, the great Bhairava. So having gone through chapter 6 and all these other stuff about how to get rid of these beings, how to protect yourself from them, in this we get this esoteric interpretation. Actually, they're doing you a favor. They're servants of the great Bhairava. And then it says, why are souls created just from the self of the self-created one, from Shiva? The souls are used for the purpose of sacrifice to the Lord and not otherwise. In that way, the yoginis free souls from sin, O fair one. For the purpose of grace, the yoginis cut the flood of their bonds. So Shiva creates souls out of himself so that they can be liberated through the sacrifice of the yoginis. But if he hadn't created them in the first place, they wouldn't need to be liberated anyway. But, of the souls used in this way, the soul goes to the highest abode. The yoginis unite the souls to Shiva by the three methods. They unite the souls by the three supreme, subtle, and gross methods, i.e. the three yogas that I've just described, and they do not simply kill with their power. They don't simply kill you, they free you. So there's the secret. So I want to rush on because we haven't got much time. Oh yeah, the other kind of yoga is these Bhava Vedas, these meditations on the different deity systems. I won't go into this here now. But you've got different visualizations that all these chapters describe. But basically, I want to wind up in the next minute. You've got the universe as a hierarchy of levels. You've got these different Tantras, ontic categories. You've got this idea of an emanation from a supreme being. You've got non-dualism as emanation rather than identity. I don't think it's a pure, although Kshemarajah wants it to be, he wants it to be a pure recognition, pratyabhijna kind of text, but it's not. It's an emanationist text. And the importance of the cosmos is there from the start. So chapter 2, which is all about the Netra-tantra, begins with an account of why we need these yogas and what the kind of universe it is that we live in. So you've got this hierarchical universe. The Supreme Shiva manifests Shiva as manifest, and Shiva becomes Maya, and Maya becomes the earth. As in contrast to the Shaiva Siddhanta, where it's not Shiva that emanates the universe, it's materials, Bindu, it all comes out of material, subtle material energy or power. And it's set within various theological problems. But the Netra-tantra theology, that you've got a conception of God as transcendent, Vishvatirana, and immanent, Vishatma. These are words used by Kshemarajah in his commentary. It's an emanationist cosmology, and it's panentheism. God is in the universe, God is in everything. And it offers paradox as well. So he's can't be smelled, he can't be spoken about, and yet he's all words and all smells and all the rest of it. And the condition of liberation is agelessness and deathlessness, and it seems to suggest physical immortality through these practices. And at its heart, I think you've got this Shakta theology that the yoginis kill you, but they're really liberating you. I think that's an innovation in the history of Indian religions. So there you've got the cosmic structure, the eternal goddess. In one passage, she's called the goddess, Shiva, Mrityunjaya, Netra-tantra. This is a transcosmic reality which manifests as the cosmic order of the ontic categories of the Tattvas the orders of beings, humans, animals, plants, and supernatural agents that I described earlier. And it also manifests as these Bhava Vedas, which have these soteriological functions of saving you. All the different deity systems are incorporated within the text. So I'll leave you with some questions. What's the place of esoteric yoga within the public ritual dimension of the text? What is the metaphysics of the Netra-tantra? Is it coherent? What are the goals of the Netra-tantra? And which is more important, liberation or magical protection? And who produced the text and why? So I'll stop my sharing the screen. Thank you for your attention. I've been talking for a long time, longer than I perhaps intended, but there we are. So we got about 25 minutes or more. We got up to half. Well, anyway, we got loads of time for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Thanks for that excellent survey of what's a very complicated text, isn't it? Hard to make sense.
Just to say, I have actually just dropped this loading into the chat at the moment, the handout that Gavin sent through. So if anybody wants to, it's a really nice summary. So if anybody wants to look at it now as they're asking questions, they can go ahead and do that. So it should have just dropped into the chat now.
Great.
Yes, yeah, I've got it. Thank you, Thea. Yes, thanks, Gavin. Reminded me, I haven't looked at the Netra-tantra for a while, but it's some very esoteric material in there. It's an interesting mixture, and it threw up loads of questions for me. I shall try to restrain myself, but at least at the beginning. So
something in the chat there. Shall I have a look at the chat?
I think that's just your handouts
been
logged in. You don't need to look at the chat. I will keep an eye on the Q&A. Don't worry. I'll curate any questions that come up. But I was wondering about lots of things, but in particular the relationship between yoga and jnana, because you said that there's a triple method, the three methods, and that the mantra, yoga, and jnana is sort of highest in the hierarchy. And then when you were demonstrating or showing the sort of reinterpretation of the 8 angas of yoga, when I think a separate question is why 8, because that's quite unusual within Shaiva Tantras. It normally just 6 anga system, but maybe you could say something separately about that. But I was the way that the different angas are reinterpreted in a almost sort of Gnostic Gyanin way, that firstly rather reminded me of a text called the Aparokshanubhuti, which is probably quite a lot later, maybe 14th, 15th century Vedantic text, which does the same thing. It has a 15 anga system of yoga. But for every anga, it just reinterprets it as a sort of Vedantic, Gnostic experience, rather than, so the message is effectively that, everyone's going on about yoga, but really the true yoga is this. It's this Vedantic, realization. I guess that would, I'm no expert on this, but I guess that would be related in some ways to the sort of Shaiva Pratyabhigya. So I was wondering, but yet at the same time, as you demonstrated, there's lots of material in the text saying how important yoga is. Sure. So I wonder if you could reflect on that. I mean, do you see, and we find this a lot, certainly in the sort of text that I work on, there's a tension between yoga and jnana, and it feels like some sort of long-term argument is being worked out depending on the relative position of the two. And so, yes, just that reinterpretation of the different angas seemed to me to be like a statement of actually, this is what it's really about. For example, very clearly at the end when you gave the explanation of samadhi as being the realization of the true state of the self. The Shaiva traditions often don't like the idea of a sort of gradual hard work method of yoga that you do in stages, and they want just that sudden realization. So anyway, I wonder if you could comment on that.
That's great, Jim. Yeah, you've articulated it very well. I think you're right. There is a tension, if you like, between jnana and yoga expressed here, because I think that's what the text itself claims to be universal, and so it wants to reconcile these different things. But of course, it puts jnana at the top. So the true realization, the deeper one, is the non-realization in a sense, because we are already that knowledge, that reality. So we just have to open our eyes to the truth of the matter. So it reinterprets these angas. Yeah, why I thought that, why not the Shadanga? Why not the 6 limbs, which is the Shaiva thing, you know, they've got 6 limbs. So it's interesting that it should choose the 8-limbed system. So I suppose in response to that, there's a couple of comments. One would be, yes, I think there is a tension, if you like, in the text, and it privileges jnana over yoga. Secondly, it uses the word yoga in 2 senses. One is to refer to these all 3, gross, subtle, and supreme. In the later chapters, it refers to all 3 as yogas. But earlier on, it referred to them as dhyana. So it does at least in one place, it uses yoga as a synonym for dhyana. And so it uses the word yoga in 2 senses, I think. One is to refer to all 3 practices, and the other is just to refer to the subtle practice. So maybe when it just refers to the subtle practice, the sukshma dhyana as yoga, and the paradhyana as jnana, maybe that's reflecting that tension between the 2. And it's there explicitly saying, actually, knowledge of your identity with Shiva is a higher spontaneous realization than all the effort you have to put into visualizing yourself going up through these different levels within the body. Because at the end of the day, why bother with all that subtle yoga and even the gross yoga if all you can, if you just got the 8, I mean, you just need the jnana, you just need the supreme yoga, really, I would have thought, to achieve all your heart's desires, all your liberation and power. But yes, I think that's right. I was interested in that other text that you were talking about, the aparoksha, whatever it was that you said.
Anubhuti, aparoksha anubhuti. It's sometimes attributed to Shankara, but very unlikely. But yes, it does something very similar with this reinterpretation of the different.
I've never come across that reinterpretation of these yogas before, so I was fascinated by that. And
that does seem like an attempt to put yoga in its place to some extent.
I think you're right. Yes, to put yoga in its place. And
I was also, well, there are lots of other questions, but one, I mean, I think you were sort of referring to hatha yoga, and I would say that the big difference, and from my, I haven't, as I said, I haven't looked closely at the Netra-tantra for a while, but I don't think, I mean, I'm pretty certain it doesn't have any physical practices in it, does it? I mean,
no physical practices, no. Nothing.
Quite the opposite, almost, as you say, as you pointed out, that the practices associated with yoga are almost exclusively dhyana, aren't they? It's various meditation, visualization.
That's right. That's right. It's very unphysical in a way. Oh, it's got the possession stuff, and that, I suppose, that's the ritual diagrams and framing the person's name with mantras and all that. But that's the only real practices it seems to refer to. That's right. That's interesting.
And then, it seems also, I mean, I hadn't really thought about this before, but in the course of your talk, there are lots of triads keep cropping up. And is that a theme that's inherited from the Trika? Is that
it could be inherited. I haven't thought of that. It could be, yeah. It could be inherited from the Trika, yeah. But yeah, there are triads all over the place. There's Icha, Jnana, Kriya, Shaktis, and there's the 3 yogas, and there's three luminaries. There's 3s all over the place. That's right, and it maps them onto each other sometimes. But I was interested that I've never come across anything like this before. That this sort of esoteric interpretation of possession it's a theologizing of it's a Shaiva takeover of popular practices in a sense, because it's saying, this is the real meaning. This is the deeper meaning that we have of these popular practices of possession and exorcism. I mean, in those days, if your kid's sick, you'll do what you can to get them well. And I mean, before we knew about the etiology of disease and so on, you employ a mantra to get your kid better, you know.
It's a very curious sort of juxtaposition, though, of quite sort of jungly sorcery type practices with this more rarefied, like you said,
That is interesting, isn't it? And there's not many. There's only, to my knowledge, the Ishana Shiva Guru Deva Padati, which has got stuff on all this possession and exorcism. So I think it's a rare text because it contains that material. So it kind of offers a window into popular practices at the time. So it's interesting because it seems, as Alexis shows, it seems to address the king and the royal family, but it's also got all this stuff which seems to reflect much more popular, widespread, common practices of ordinary people.
That was another question I had. I was wondering, to what extent do you think the king, because there does seem to be this royal connection, it's probably commissioned by kings. Do you think that the king or kings would have been expected to practice these yogas as well, to perform these practices? Is there any indication there? Because normally, I mean, what we find in some Shaiva traditions is this idea of the special diksha for kings that sort of excuses them from doing ritual and having to do anything. They just, by getting the special Raja diksha, then they can carry on as kings, but still get enlightened and so forth. So is there any indication within the text of whether kings would be expected to actually do these practices?
As far as I can see, I think no. I think the opposite, in fact, because of this. There's a slight disagreement with Bjarne about this phrase "for another." Does it mean the yogi does these practices for the king? I think if for another means for the king, then as it probably does, then I think that's the mantra or the yogi does it for them. They don't have to do anything. As you say, they get initiated, and that guarantees them liberation. And so they don't have to worry.
The king has commissioned the text in order to instruct the sort of yogis who are doing the dirty work for him.
That's right. That's what's happened, I think. Yeah. So Kirti, I often wonder about what's the material conditions. I mean, Kirti Dara, who's getting in the ink and who's making the palm leaves for him? How much is he getting paid to write it? How long does it take him? All these questions I'm very interested in, but it's very difficult to access those kinds of questions or the answers to those questions.
Indeed. Well, I think we're meant to be getting the Q&A is where if any people want to put questions out, they go in the Q&A. People might be confused, Gavin, because we've slightly changed our format at the moment.
Okay, perhaps there's no questions.
Yeah, it's good. I think everyone might be quietly reading, trying to absorb the handout as well, which is really fascinating.
It's really good.
No, it is really good. I just think it's slightly blown people's minds. But I was wondering, when you're talking about material conditions, so as a kind of as a modern specialist, that's what fascinates me as much as anything else, is the different audiences that this is written for. So you've got this idea. I just want to kind of clarify that. So you've got this kind of like the everyday kind of, these are the practices that will help cure the diseases in your kid and so on, that you were saying, that is the pragmatic everyday kind of person. And then you've got kind of, it's the theology more than for kind of the ritual specialists to understand, well, how does this fit in with other things? And then also this kind of like, and this is what you do on behalf of your kings and your leaders if you need to do that. And I just wonder if you could say more, if you thought about that, the multi-audience nature of the text, if that makes sense.
I agree. I have thought about that, and I think that you're right. I think it says it's samanya, it says it's universal, and I think part of that universality is it wants to appeal to all levels of society. Certainly, it wants to get in with the kings and the hoity-toity people sort of things, because they'll support it, but it also seems to me to be aimed at ordinary people. Anyone can employ a mantra or use the nature mantra themselves to get a better job or to get cured from a sickness. So I think you're right. It does appeal to, and it's also written, so it must be for a literate. It must all of these texts must be for a fairly educated audience, because they're
in Sanskrit.
They're written in Sanskrit. That's right.
So when we're saying everybody, we're specifically saying Brahmin everybody's.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. We're saying Brahmin everybody's. That's right. That's right. We're saying, and presumably ordinary people would have to employ the local mantrin who would be able to perhaps read this text or at least know these practices.
So I'm just wondering again, forgive me if this is obvious as a modern specialist rather than a pre-modern specialist, but then do we have any sense of what other levels of society are doing?
Very interesting question. I'm really deeply interested in that. I don't know the answer to that. Perhaps
if we don't have the text.
We don't have the text. There's a text called the Ishana Shiva Guru Deva Padati, which is from Kerala. It's very similar because it talks about these practices, how you cure people from possession, and that's interesting because that seems to be looking at the lower strata of society, because it talks about people who are possessed writhing around on the ground, and it doesn't make a distinction between the possessed person and the being who possesses them. So you have to beat them up, and if that doesn't get rid of them, then you do mantras, or you stick the Mormons. These are centers in the body in Ayurveda. You stick a trident or a sharp object into their Mormons so that blood flows, and that bleeds out the demon sometimes. And if that doesn't work, then you nail the shikha, the tuft of hair of the Brahmin man, to the tree, bring the being into that, and then cut it so that it remains on the tree. So it seems that these practices are indeed indicative of lower strata, and also they're geared at women. A lot of them are geared towards women in the
so you're problematic women in your life.
Problematic women. women who are laughing too loudly, women who are women who are standing at a crossroads, women who pretend to be of a different caste, women who are naked, women who are stepping outside of their what they're supposed to do, they're subject to present, yawning.
Oh my God. I guess I'm reminded of the history of how we treat mental illness in lots of parts of the world. The early treatments do seem to be quite violent in many ways, and it's a lot about this is how you treat people who repeatedly socially transgress, is beatings and bloodlettings, and
oh really, that's probably, is that it? That's very, is that, I didn't know that.
I think there's definitely elements of that, and certainly if you're talking in the kind of pre-modern European tradition, you have the changeling myth, for example. What you do if a child doesn't turn out right, that they're actually they're a fairy baby that's been swapped by the fae, and what you're supposed to do to a changeling is very, very similar in that they are both essentially the possessed and the possessee, if you like. So you're supposed to kind of burn them and do horrible things to them to make the changeling baby disappear and your real baby come back, basically.
Wow, isn't that interesting? It's almost the same.
That's what's fascinating.
Fascinating, because you've got what you were saying there. You've another not in the Netra-tantra, but it's other texts. You've got kids who won't sleep at night or who are misbehaving. You've got rituals to put them right,
Yes, ritually beating them to make them go to sleep. Do we have a couple of questions coming in, Jim? Have I opened the floodgates?
Yeah, we've got one question. We've got a couple of people saying they can't see the handout in the chat. I'm not sure why, because I can see it clearly and was able to download it. And you have to click on it. It's not sort of immediately.
They do. They may not have the chat box actually open. So if you see chat down, the thing that says chat down the bottom, click on it. It should bring up the thing that says webinar chat. I have sent it to everyone, so it should say it. But also, if you really can't get it, drop me an email at cys@soas.ac.uk. I'll put that in the chat as well, and I can send it to you by email if you can't figure it out.
Yeah, I can send you a more updated handout if you like, because some of that material wasn't in this one.
Okay, thanks, Thea. And then there is one question that's kind of related actually to what you're just talking about. Do I read them out, or do we go to the question? I can't remember, sorry.
As you wish, you can read it out. If it looks like a long one, do you want to paraphrase it?
Effectively, it's saying that some teachers about psychology say that you can't really cure psychological diseases. You have to just put people on medication. Seems like a fairly extreme position. But the questioner, who's Stephanie Quasio, is asking, she was saying that she would like your point of view concerning yoga and the possibility of healing people with certain mental conditions.
Wow.
By beating them with
Tough
sticks.
question. Tough question. I mean, maybe you
Tough
can reference
question.
Tantras from Netra-tantra.
I've got no view. I've got no. I mean, it's possible. I just don't know. I'm afraid. It's not my. I wouldn't like to pronounce on that. I'm sure yoga has many. I mean, Jim can answer better than me. Yoga has many benefits for people, but whether it can cure mental illness, I don't know. I wouldn't like to say.
Does it to a certain extent depend on what yoga we're talking about? Because the kind of yoga we're talking about here seems to be involving poking people with tridents and beating people with sticks, which is possibly not, has a very different effect to a nice gentle sun salutation.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yes. I mean, because people who are sick and so on, or who are misbehaving, they thought that's the worldview through which they interpreted these things. In a way, they couldn't have done anything else in a way. Because they didn't know about the etiology of disease and so on. They didn't have the category. Well, they did have mental illness. Did they have the category of mental illness at this time, Jim? Would it?
I'm sure there would be a manus, yes, particular mental diseases, but I'm not sure they get addressed in yoga texts. But mind you, yoga texts claim they can do anything and heal more or less anything. So I would have thought you find it within the textual tradition, but I don't think that's what the question is after. I think she's sort of wondering whether yoga as practiced today might be able to heal people with certain mental conditions, which I think you and I as Indologists can perhaps bow out of answering that question. Maybe that was for
and I'm going to not answer it on the grounds that it's not the subject of the talk.
I just don't know the answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I have some idea what the nature of the research is. Inconclusive would be my answer.
Yes, inconclusive. Yes.
That's a great.
All research is,
isn't it? Just.
We've got another question there, which is from Alexa Cohingston, saying that thank you for sharing this very interesting text. You mentioned this is the first early representation of the chakras. Can you develop this more? And is there any reference to any of the specific chakras and healing through these centers in the body? Let me just chip in there. There is a mention of a Nabi chakra in Patanjali, by the way.
Oh, there is?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we get a couple of other similar things, but it's very unsystematic. I think this is one of the earliest systematic descriptions of a group of chakras. Yeah, anyway. But I think the questioner would like you to elaborate a little bit more.
Well, you probably can more than me, but I think that's, I mean, I thought I was just as a systematic thing where you've got this description in that first few verses of chapter 7 of these systems mapped on top of each other. Helen Brunner's got an interesting diagram in her article, the way she maps them all out. So you've got the hierarchy of the body, and these chakras are mapped upon on this hierarchy in the text, and so it's very systematic. It's very clear, and it's built up. So you've got the 16 supports, which probably correspond to the 16 vowels, 6 chakras, and 5 emptinesses, and all these odd kind of things all mapped onto each other. So a couple of comments. One is that I thought this could be the earliest, but I don't know that, earliest systematic representation of the chakras. I'm interested to hear that you've got Nabi chakra in Patanjali. Didn't know that. That's probably what this fellow in Nepal was talking about. What was I going to say? There was another point I was going to make. Yeah, it's a systematic, the first, a very early systematic construction of the hierarchy of these.
I think the questioner was wondering also if there's any reference to healing by visualization practices on these chakras.
Oh, I see. Not in chapter 7. You don't have that. What it's concerned with is the rising up of this power, this aham mantra, through the central channel to the crown of the head, and once it gets there, either stays there or it releases the nectar of immortality to flood the body, and that's all it seems to be concerned with. So it doesn't associate different chakras with different kind of illnesses or different states of mind, not in this text anyway. But it does talk about piercing, and piercing with the needle of sound, which is interesting, which is an early idea.
Yes, I guess that maps onto, is related to this notion. I've got a student working on this of mantra-chara, of with mantras raising the breath up through the central channel and piercing.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing what I thought was interesting was that it seems to indicate that this subtle body, this is visualized, that these seem to be visualization practices. They're not reified. I don't think it seems to indicate the opposite, that these are not to do with the physical, but these are this subtle imaginative practice. So it's interesting because in the 19th century they get this reification of the chakra system with identified with organs of the body and all that.
Absolutely,
But
yeah, a long way from that, yeah.
We're a long way from that here. Yeah.
Okay, now we have actually, Gavin, we've sort of reached time, but we've got one more question. I think it's hopefully quite easy to answer. If you don't mind me take that one, and then
Sure. We'll wind up. Yeah, great.
Fernando Rios asking, saying, in mantra yoga, the mantra should be recited, or should it, or actually this missed out a word, or should something internally in coordination with the breath?
Oh, I see.
I suppose it's the idea of whether it's vocalized or whether it's a more of a sort of
I think in the gross yoga, when you're getting rid of possessing yoginis, I think it's uttered. I think it's Om Jum Sa Deva Dataya Jas Jum Sak Jum Om, something like that. But I think in the internal, in the subtle one, I don't know, this is just my view, I haven't got any indication in the text. It doesn't say do it quietly or do it loudly. I suspect the mantra aham is uttered privately or under the breath, but it doesn't say.
In your translation, did it say something about raising aham as well? That's raised. So that seems to be perhaps connected with this notion of mantra chara and.
Oh yes, of course it would.
Breath and going up central.
You raise it up. That's right, Jim. I hadn't thought that. Yeah, that's right. Mantra. Yeah. The aham is raised up with the breath through the central channel. Yeah.
Great.
So,
well, what's the plan for all of this? You're going to be publishing a critical edition and translation and.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's right. So we've done chapters. I've gone through the whole text really, and I've got, but a few years ago I decided to change strategy, and we're going to base it on the Nepalese version as the prime. Even if the Kashmir offers a better reading, we're not going to do a strictly critical edition, if you see what I mean. We're going to do more of an edition based on the Nepalese text, but with in the apparatus differences with the Kashmir version recorded, so that if people disagree with our presentation, they can make their own critical edition, if you like. Something like that.
Great. And I hope you won't ask me the same question back, but when any idea of when it might be ready and published?
Yeah, well, we've got a deadline for the first volume for June. So that's volume chapters 1 to 8.
Okay, so that will be in 2 volumes overall.
2 volumes, yeah.
Okay, great. Keep an eye out for that. Getting it.
It's a shame though, the most interesting chapters, all this stuff on chapter 19, the nature of the yoginis and possession and sacrifice, they're really doing us a favor, which I think is really an innovation in the history of Indian religions. That will have to come. I'll have to wait for a couple of years, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, that's further down the line. It actually reminded me of I was a bit nervous when I got my PhD thesis published, the Khichdi Vidya, because there's a line in there saying whoever makes this known to all and sundry will be eaten alive by yoginis. Maybe that'd be a good thing. Maybe when
they'll be doing you a favor if they do that.